Hello! You like my spooky music? It occurred to me it's midway through October. It is time to fully embrace Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. For no other reason than one should be able to wear costumes anytime one wants, but it's really only socially acceptable on Halloween. Hey guys, Druid, thank you so much, my dear. Marodim, Kate, and Robin. You guys, I hope you had a good weekend. Theremin music, yeah. I think that last one. See, that last one was called Dark Ambient Horror Cinematic Halloween Atmospheric. Some of them don't actually have a title. They're just a conglomeration of like hashtags, I think. Anyway, I was hoping maybe Twitch won't ding me for that one. So, it's Monday. Did you guys have a good weekend? I hope you did. I know Milton blasted through, I guess late last week, southeastern coastal areas and, did what it does. It's hurricane season. But I did hear from a few of our nerdy cakelets and other nerds in that area, and it sounds like everybody's okay. So, fingers crossed. I always hate to be a bummer about the weather, but geez, man. Sometimes you can't get a break. The weather was fantastic here. I got to see the aurora, you guys. I got to see the Northern Lights. I didn't think this is something I would ever see like in person. I know like sort of northern states in the US sometimes get to see a little bit of the Northern Lights. And, obviously in Canada, I guess there's parts where people are used to seeing them. The places that are, I don't know, lit 24/7 some seasons, like Iceland and the Scandinavian countries, like they're so used to the aurora, it's not a big deal. But I have only seen video and pictures of the aurora. And my husband had said, like, my son found, that we were going to be in this band. And my husband's like, yeah, I don't think that's accurate. I think like Pennsylvania is probably the southernmost. But anyway, he gets a text. I think this was Thursday night. He gets a text and he jumps up and he's like, it's here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And yeah, we had it. And it was like the strangest thing I've ever seen. Because like, if you've never seen it, it doesn't behave quite like anything you would expect. Like, I kind of thought it would be sort of like, like a light show, maybe not quite that much. Or, that it, like clouds, kind of clouds coming by. No, not really. It just, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. And, I think that what we got down here was probably not what, like the really strong stuff that, you would get in more northern latitudes, but it was pretty significant. And my husband is, a hobby photographer, he's a pretty good photographer, and he took a bunch of pictures from our front yard. And granted, we've got street lights and stuff, by the time it was dark. But anyway, it was so very, very cool. Yeah. So Mario Dim, yeah. So you got, wait a minute, aren't you in Texas? Wow. And so does it undulate? I don't know if that's what I would call it. It's kind of like this like amorphous sort of like, I don't know. I guess I kind of expected to look up in the clouds to be doing something. Really? It was 49 states? I had no idea. Wow. Okay. So I'm guessing Hawaii maybe didn't see it. Anyway, it was just a very cool thing. And, like, I think we're lucky in this day and age that we know what those kind of things are. And I mean, because you think ancient man was probably freaking out when the sky suddenly turned green and purple, right? We know what those things are now. And it's just so cool to look at. It's like, this is not something that normally happens. I mean, usually, we've got blue skies or we've got gray skies. That's pretty much our choice here on the East Coast. And, like this kind of stuff is not every day. It's kind of like the eclipse. I have seen 2 eclipses now in the past. What is it? I guess, was it 2017 was the other one? And I think the one in 2017 was probably a better eclipse than this year, which I don't know if you guys caught my stream the day of the eclipse this year. It was ridiculous. Visual electric boogaloo. Did anybody see the comet? No, I heard about that comet. And I want to say it's going to be around for a while. Did I read that, or I'm imagining that? Anyway, it's kind of funny, you think, again, people before they really understood, the cosmology of the ancients was, like they understood some, but they kind of didn't others. And you think, your average person who maybe is not well read, back in the day, they didn't teach this kind of stuff in primary school, may have been kind of like, I don't know what's going on here. It's a little freaky. But think about all of the quilts that have documented, stuff from the heavens. There's the quilt that is, and of course I'm not going to remember any of these names because I don't have it in front of me, but there's the quilt that it was a teacher, she made, as she was talking about her, talking to her class about the solar system or whatever. And this is probably, I don't know, 18 something. And she made this beautiful quilt. Harriet Powers. I want to say in both of her quilts that we know of, she documented celestial happenings. I think one was a meteor shower, one was a comet, something like that. let's see, Grandma Carpenter. She had the rainbows, but also the night sky, like all kinds of cool stuff. And you think quilters, quilters have their eyeballs trained to the sky sometimes. Ah, Telescope for the comment. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check into that because I did read about it, and I'm glad you guys reminded me because I think a comet is a kind of a cool thing. So, well, did I get anything done this weekend that I had planned? I got about 50% of 50% of the things. I always do this to myself. I overplan my weekends and then get to like just a fraction of it. But progress is progress. So because I haven't had a chance to read to you much lately because of other things, we're going to try to do a double a double stream. So maybe 2 chapters depending on how much I can get through. But before we get to the Lady of Godey's, I wanted to show you some Bicentennial textiles. So I just grabbed a couple of things. I have, and now that I'm sitting here and I'm looking at my little pile, I'm like, oh, there are like 2 or 3 other things I completely forgot to grab. But as I'm out there doing my research, I'm looking at things, and I had totally forgotten that I have a small collection of, oh, you don't see anything. You don't know why you were looking. Well, we're going to have to find out for you, Druid. We'll get the details. Somebody put a link in there. I have a small collection of dish towels, calendar dish towels. They are such an interesting piece of textile. I mean, you can still buy them. They were big in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I think I've seen them go back into the 50s. I'm trying to see. I mean, again, it's not something I've researched, but you run across this stuff when you're online looking for other things, and I feel like I've seen ones that were pretty old, but definitely the 60s. And for a while, I was trying to collect ones that had my birth date, my birth year. And as I'm doing that, of course, I was 3 during the Bicentennial, so I find Bicentennial ones. So I have 2 of these, and these are not actually calendar ones, but these are just Bicentennial celebration. This one's pretty ubiquitous. I also have it somewhere in like a red, white, and blue, but I couldn't find it. I really need to clean up my cutting table. And so this one I thought was really cute. So I guess it's supposed to be, I don't know, colonial couple, George Washington, and I don't know. This lady looks more like a Marie Antoinette. I don't know. But very cute. It's got all the stuff. The bell, the colonial people, the shield. You got the shield there in the middle. So all the things. And also I have some bell fabric that I wanted to show you and totally forgot. So that's for another time. Now, as I keep seeing Bicentennial fabric, and I'm out there looking to see like what is out there. There was all of this centennial fabric. In fact, let's look at Barbara Brackman's website real quick. Oh shoot, I need to resize a couple things. I forgot. Jill and I were on the other day and I moved everything around. Okay, that should be good. Okay, so in case you don't know, barbarabrackman.blogspot.com is one of Barbara Brackman's blogs. She's got several, I think, but this is the material culture one. I love this. She's got tons and tons and tons of stuff on here. Every time I Google a topic, a quilty topic, I end up with a link to Barbara Brackman's website or her blogs, because she's written about everything you can imagine. Apparently, back in March this year, she wrote about centennial fabrics. And so I thought we could look at these real quick, just to refresh your memory. We have looked at some centennial fabrics before. This one is the 1776, 1876. I actually have a little scrap of that in a different colorway. Although this in theory could be I don't think this is a faded version. I think this is just a different colorway. This is, I guess, the black and white colorway, I guess, of it. George Washington, obviously, pretty popular. She's got all of these. Oops. There we go. This one's very cool. The shield, so popular. Sometimes, I've noticed you really have to look when you see some of these because they're not immediately obvious that it is a centennial or a bicentennial. Because, these little, I guess they're kind of like, if they were printed on paper, I think they'd be like lithograph, or I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what they're called on fabric. That's eluding me. I know I've heard a term for it, but it's not really chintz. It's a little chintzy. Yeah. This star fabric is pretty cool. I've not seen that out in the wild. This one, also very cool. Look at this. It's the crosswise, and then from a distance, you just kind of got a cool plaid. Okay, so this one is really what I wanted to get to, and we did look at these the other day. These are the Pennsylvania exposition. It was the Bicentennial exposition, and this is a bandana. And here's another one. And I know we looked at several of the centennial quilts that are held by museums, and we see this textile over and over. It is. It was just like the thing. Lots of people got one, and there's several versions of it. And, just some other types of textiles that, not really pennants necessarily, but like, these cotton bandanas and some silk stuff I've seen. Anyway, long story short, as I was looking at those, I started thinking, and I'm like, did they do anything like that for the bicentennial? Oh, did they? So, of course, we've got all the fabric, and I know Mara Dim has a very cool piece of little scrap that she sent me a picture of. So I'm interested to keep seeing stuff like that. So if you come across any bicentennial fabric, take a picture so I can see it, because I know there's a lot out there. Cranston, Ellie Walker, I feel like they were really in on the bicentennial thing. So, like I said, next I'm thinking, what's the deal with bicentennial type of swag? There's a lot of it. Some of it's ridiculous. Some of it is trash. But did they have bandanas and scarves? So this is one I found. Very cute. And it's just sort of I think the thing that makes it sort of bicentennial is the eagle. Now, the question is this really a bicentennial? The eBay seller said it was. I think it just kind of goes along sort of nicely with some bicentennial stuff. I don't think it's official in any way. I think that this is just a scarf manufacturer that kind of got in on the action. Very cute. But there were actual bicentennial bandanas and textiles for scarves and things. This is one. It's a very common one. It actually comes in, I think, 2 colorways. But this is the deal. This is for sure a bicentennial item. And the other one I have is this. This one is never been washed. It is, as you can imagine, stiff as a board, any bandana is when you first buy it. But it is Paul Revere. You can see him riding his horse. Get one of them. So, and then I have bookmarked another dozen of these. So it's really interesting. I kind of wonder, is this the kind of thing that people, this is a bandana manufacturer, Color Fast, 100% Color Fast. I don't know who the actual maker is, but you wonder, did they just, it's just an event. Let's make a scarf for it. Let's make a bandana for it. Or is there, that actual connection to these textiles from 1876? I don't know. It's all the things that I'm looking at. When you're early in the research, you ask these random questions and then you find out, well, that wasn't a very, that was not really an original train of thought, because here's the answer and it was a really easy one. So anyway, like I said, if you run across any bicentennial stuff, give me a shout. Just, I'd love to just document this stuff, that's out there. And I'm really right now paying attention to the differences between what they did with the centennial and what they did with the bicentennial. Now, here is this other thing that I will mention to you. Find my screen. By the way, I had mentioned several times I can never get the wording right of what this thing is called, right? So it is a semi-quincentennial, is the 250th anniversary. It can also be called a bisesquicentennial, a sesquicentennial, which I think is the term I kept thinking of. And the one I like the most, which is the easiest, is the quarter millennial. So that is what we will be celebrating on July 4th, 2026. Now, why do we care about that? Well, I do know that there are some things afoot in the United States as it pertains to 250 years. And I started thinking, well, what's the urgency with 250 years? 300 is going to be the tricentennial. Well, 250 years, that 50-year span instead of 100 years, it seems like there's this sense of urgency. And I feel that way too. I think things have changed so very much since 1976. I have no way of proving it or documenting it, but I feel like the changes from 1876 to 1976 were vast. But I feel like the changes from 1976 to 2026 are on track with that 100-year change. It feels that way, at least. I don't know. Technology has just skyrocketed. And so I think that a 50-year celebration could be kind of significant. Now, the 150 years was 1926. And I have yet to find anything interesting about that. I do know that there was some stuff that happened, but the government didn't sponsor anything. It just is. So, I'm assuming that somebody did something about it, but I don't know yet. So anyway, like I said, I came across this because I was looking specifically for the, what is this thing called, this 150 years? And it occurred to me, like, what is the U.S. doing? Like, it would really surprise me. 1,000 years as equally divided. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, tricentennial, like, none of us are going to be here for that. I mean, yeah, people born right now in theory will be there, but we won't. I sure know I won't. So, unless I live to be 103, and I don't see that happening. So anyway, I'm like thinking, we got to be doing something. I'd be really surprised. Well, I'm not surprised to find out there is a United States semi-quincentennial, what is that called? Committee? Yes, it's a commission. It is a commission. United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission. And it was established under Barack Obama. I mean, this was established in 2016. I mean, that's crazy. So I guess it was, the end of his presidency, the summer of his presidency, July 22nd, he signed in, public whatever, amended public whatever, but it allows this, it creates this commission and allows this commission to accept congressional funding in order to do this celebration. There are commissioners, and they have been in and out of this committee throughout the years. When one congressperson ends their reign as a congressperson, when their term ends, if they're not reelected or whatever, they've swapped out. And there's literally a Wikipedia page that goes through this. There's a giant chart at the bottom that lists the commissioners and finish their term and then they're vacant and then who comes in after them. It's very interesting. Anyway, then I got a little deeper into this and I found out there is indeed an advisory council. There are multiple advisory councils specifically to different aspects of the 250. There is a cultural committee, and I started looking at all the people that are on it. And oddly, most of them are travel and tourism people. And so what their little blurb, and they have not started any kind of planning or accepting plans. Not all the people in here have a bio yet. So, fingers crossed this isn't something that's just, but the Cultural Advisory Council, it says the Cultural Advisory Council focuses on America 250's engagement efforts covering the arts, culture, hospitality, sports, tourism, and entertainment. I have a lot of stuff, but arts and culture. And so this is where some quilty stuff fits in, right? And I started thinking, I've done a little bit of, checking around. I got a little bit of intel that, there's some things afoot in the quilting community. I don't know a whole lot of details. I don't know the little bit of information I got. I don't know if it's a secret or not. So I won't say much more than that, but I've got some people to reach out to, I think. And I started thinking why can't the quilting community as a whole, and I'm talking about quilt historians, modern quilters, contemporary quilters, quilt artists, all that. Why can't we do the same thing that happened in 76, which is let these little quilting groups spring up and who want to make quilts? That is what happened in 76. I have yet to find anything that was a nationwide call. I have found lots of little advertisements this quilt guild or this group is going to meet and we're going to make a quilt. I found that kind of stuff, but I haven't found any source of somebody hey, let's this idea, right? Maybe there was. I don't know. I just haven't run across it yet. Obviously, communications were different in 76 than they are today. So, I just, my mind is running around this. And I was I don't know, maybe I need to poll some quilters. Would you be interested in contributing to a 250th anniversary quilt? And, I'm sure there's guilds and stuff that are already maybe planning to do this kind of stuff. If not, they might get interested in it. And then I started wondering, what really would be what would be the quilts be about? If you looked at the Bicentennial quilts, they were about the fabric. I feel they were, the fabric was obtained. And some of the quilts are obviously the ones that have the Philadelphia Exposition bandana, they were showcasing that piece of fabric, that textile. And, in some cases, I think it was just I'm going to celebrate, the birthday of our country by just getting a bunch of cool fabric that is made to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of our 100-year birthday of our country. Now, in 1976, by and large, everything I found for the quilt so far have been communities. And even when they're not necessarily, and I mean, you guys know what I've shown you so far, by and large, they are blocks that say something about the community, whether it's a historic home or a location or something about the community, like the waterfront or some monument or something like that. So I think I have kind of put 76 as like those quilts are community quilts. So we've got, showcasing fabric, the Centennial, showcasing community in 76. What does 250 look like? And I mean, this is a little more than a year and a half away. If you were going to make a quarter millennial quilt, what would it contain? Imagine that you're going to get together with like, I don't know, 11, 15, 19 other quilters and each make a block. What would you do? What would it be about? Like, what would be the theme of the quilt? I don't think it's, my Canadian friends, my European friends, I know you look and you shake your head. Our country is quite divided right now. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next year and a half? I would say 5 or 6 years ago, I would have no problem saying like, yeah, country's divided in a year and a half. COVID taught me never, ever think that things are going to be the same they are today in a year. So all of this, my rambling here, I just, these are the things that are going on in my head. And I'm not exactly sure yet. They haven't gelled, So if anybody's got any input, got anything to say, let me know. You know where to find me. But yeah, that's, I guess I haven't articulated this super well, but that's what's going on in my head right now. And I think these are all very interesting things. And, yeah, I feel very drawn to this idea of, quilts commemorating 250 years could have a very specific purpose and would say something very specific, right? And yeah, I mean, I know that I joke a lot and I say, people with needles and thread can save the world. Why can't quilters document in some way with quilts the ways in which we will bring our country back together and sweep out the division? I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we've got an election in less than a month. Oh my gosh. It's like, what is it? The first Tuesday in November. So I don't know what's going to happen. I really, really don't. I'm an independent is my party affiliation. That probably comes as no surprise to some people. But, so I watch both sides of everything. Anytime something comes across the news that's one side is saying, I go and look at the other side. What are they saying about it? And so I really have no sense of what's going to happen in our election in the U.S., but it is something that is all encompassing right now. It's blah. I hate election years for this very reason. My electricity is doing weird things. I appear like I don't think my internet's glitching. So anyway, so I'm going to leave it there. You guys, if you think of stuff, you know where to find me. So, Druid. If I wanted to manifest through symbolism, I would unite the world somehow. Yeah. Symbolism. That's symbolism. I think we have a very different relationship with symbolism than we might have had throughout the years. And, I think we can probably utilize symbolism in a different way than we might have in the last century. So the Texas Bicentennial is 2036. I want to do the state seal and reference the centennial, but that's because I want lots of applique. Yes. Applique is fantastic for the, when you're telling stories, applique is so good. Oh, mod art. Hey, I would love it to be political and to focus on beauty and comfort. Yes, exactly. And, my question is, how do you unite a country divided by politics? Because I feel like social issues can be challenging for people. Change management is hard for people, and social issues that, sometimes you get caught off guard by a social issue and you're like, I I don't know how to react to this. I don't know, what side am I on? That kind of stuff. But I feel like those kind of issues are much easier to manage and help people through than when you infuse politics in it. Because when you infuse politics in it, it all goes to poop. So I have like not very much respect for the political spectrum. I don't have a whole lot of respect for politicians because I'm kind of like, you want to be a politician? Why? I feel like down here on the local level, I do have contact with local politicians. I sometimes call them up and yell at them. My husband has a lot of contact with local politicians by virtue of his job. And so those are people that I'm like, okay, I understand wanting to like, jump into politics to help your community. Those people, indispensable. State level, things start to get a little funky, States are big entities and you get politics in there. And ooh. Federal level, dude. I live right outside of DC. I've lived outside of DC my entire life. Many, many, many of my relatives have worked in and out of the government, of the federal government, as either contractors or full-time employees. That's all I got to say. So yeah, I didn't mean to get up on my soapbox here, but yeah, I would love for things not to be political. I think that we can unite people a lot more when we step away from politics. And, if you've got a moral consideration about an issue, you don't need to drag politics into it. We can have conversations. We don't have to be like left and right. We can meet in the middle, in my opinion, and have good conversations about it. And we don't have to drag all of the yuck into it that I feel like we have experienced. All of this stuff goes back pre-pandemic. I know. Hi, Ivy. Yeah, you walked into the middle of cake on a soapbox. I went from Bicentennial to like, I hate politics, but let's talk about politics. Yeah, I don't want to talk about politics, but yeah. Yeah. I think that all of my peeps here, you guys, I think that we all think a lot alike. Even if we might, be coming from different, backgrounds and experiences and where we are at in life, I still think there's this thread of commonality between all of us. And yeah, I always felt that when, Mary was streaming Quilt Nerd, and when we would all get together on a Tuesday night or a Saturday night, and I felt like I learned a lot about people. I don't know you in person. Some of you, yes, I have met you in person, and but even if I haven't met you in person, you guys are still, oh, my heart, I love you. But it you can learn like kind of about the soul of a person, having never met them before. Just, you get that like, that little, like, I don't know, little spark in your tummy where you're like, I think me and this person are like, we're simpatico. So I think that in general, that the nerds and my cakelets, we think a lot alike. So I trust you guys. I think that I like the way you guys think. And I think that, I don't know, I think we can save the world. That's all I've got to say. Just a little, just a little Tuesday project, saving the world. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm going to step off the soapbox. Nobody wants to talk about politics on a Monday and division and bleh. What I would like to talk about, though, is my buddy, Sarah Josepha Hale. I've gotten some feedback about her. Some of my dear friends who lurk, who sometimes, don't catch this until a replay, which is all good. I love my lurkers. And those of you that can't make it during the day and you catch the replays, you also, my heart. I love you guys. But I've got some feedback that like loves Sarah Josepha Hale. She is like incredible. The story about like, why don't we have this in school? We've learned just the teeniest little bit about, all the others, the Elizabeth Cady Stantons, the Harriet Beecher Stowes, the the Florence Nightingales, like all of these women, but we don't really, I mean, honestly, I had never heard of Sarah Josepha Hale until I got a little bit of info about Godey's back when I was really, really ensconced in historical costuming, and really did not know a whole lot more about her until I got this book. And then I was like, oh, so her name was Sarah Hale. Like, I really did not know her name until that, until I got this book. So, the common thread, that could be a theme with a bonus pun. I love that. Unfortunately, Druid, somebody thought of it before us. I think it's Common Threads is the name of quilt-related publication. They are, I don't have the book right here, I don't think. Yeah, they're a pretty cool publishing house in the UK. But we could come up with something. We're gonna have, I think we're gonna have like an online quilt guild. Maybe it's gonna be an online quilt guild, and anybody is welcome to join. As long as you're cool, and you're all about what it is we're doing. Welcome to come and be an online quilt guild. Yeah, I know, isn't it? I feel like all of the really good like sewing and quilting, like all the good puns are taken. I don't know if anybody saw my, I put up a little Halloween reel today on Instagram, and then it copies over to Facebook, and then I put it on YouTube too. But it's 13 really bad sewing Halloween jokes. I don't know if you caught that. I'm doing a little test with some social media kind of stuff. So if you want to see the whole thing, you have to go to YouTube, but it's the beginning clip and then a little ending clip are on my Instagram. Anyway, I feel like I asked ChatGPT to write some of those jokes. Some of them were like chef's kiss. I mean, they're terrible. They're dad jokes, but and some of them were so bizarre. But I ChatGPT really, really works off the pun, the sewing pun. It loves sewing puns, I think. And some of them were not very good. But anyway, I digressed. Let's talk about Sarah Hale. So far, we've only done half this book, and Sarah has, she's been a lady editor for 50 years in the 1800s, 1830 to like 1880 something. She has, she's spearheaded fashion. She's gotten all of these social issues taken care of, hospitals, kindergarten, women's education. It just doesn't end. She makes me feel really bad about myself because I have all of these, opportunities in the 21st century. This lady in the 19th century is making do with like nothing, and gets all this stuff done. So I think she is like my hero. I think Sarah Josepha Hale is absolutely the person that if I could have dinner with anyone living or dead, that question, people, who would you have dinner with? Sarah Hale's at the top of the list. All right, let's get going. As a reminder, we are reading The Lady of Godey's, Sarah Josepha Hale by Ruth Finley. And as you know, Ruth Finley, she's got a turn of phrase. I can't remember what it was in the last chapter that made me laugh so hard. I thought I was gonna lose it. So today we're getting to chapter 10, and the title is 21 miles an hour. I think this is going to be about trains. I do know that it's about steam power, and then at 21 miles an hour, it's got to be the train, right? All right, let's go. Chapter 10, 21 miles an hour. The age of Godey's was the age of invention. The magazine saw the rise of mechanical science and the consequent development of power and of wire communication. Living conditions had been static throughout centuries. Godey's saw changes that were unprecedented, sudden, and confusing. Telegraphy Telegraphy at first seemed more miraculous and awesome than practical. Men had no background for conceiving what God had wrought, and messages conveyed along a wire appeared little less than black magic. Steam, on the other hand, was worked into gradually. Anyway, its action could be seen with the eyes, experienced with the body. Applied to transportation, it marked the dividing line between the old order and the new, revolutionizing life and necessitating readjustment of all values, spiritual and material, individual and social. Whoa, that's a lot. I think it's interesting that she says, telegraphy, the telegraph. Men had no background for conceiving what God had wrought, and messages appeared like a little less than black magic. Think about today. I mean, think about people that still struggle with concepts of, the internet and computers and all that stuff. I think people generally kind of understand, like, buried cables and all that kind of stuff. But I think this idea of things that are not tangible, they're just like a whole swath of people that just struggle with that concept. Like it's hard to wrap your head around something that you can't touch, that's, sitting right in front of me. Or, in the concept of a computer, like I can touch a computer, I can type on it, I can see it on the stuff on the screen, but like, how is this stuff happening? I think that there's, definitely lots of people that sort of struggle with that even today. So it's funny to see these kind of through lines throughout history. Steam, announced the editor of the Lady's Book in 1838, will, oh wow, this is big, it will annihilate space and time. It can lengthen our years to antediluvian measure, dating by events instead of moons, cross the Atlantic in 12 days, and how much time is redeemed? 12 days. Yes, imaginary numbers and math. There's so much about math. I always hear people that are like really good with math are like, it's so concrete. It's provable. And I'm like, no, it isn't. It is not concrete at all. I don't get it. Algebra? Come on. Now, actually, algebra is pretty useful when you're trying to figure out like quilt math. Algebra can be helpful. But geometry is more so. All right. It was the wonder of the ages, this giant force, especially in its extension of travel over land. Rivers, to be sure, were the world's first inland highways. Yeah, they were. And in America, they had been utilized from the beginning. Steam was developed as a power on water decades before it was made practical on land. And the steamboat made a great difference. But it was the railroad that became the love of the people, its iron tracks leading the way from isolated provincialism to cosmopolitan nationalism. Robin. You know what? We're not going to talk about politics, and we're not going to talk about imaginary numbers. And unlike so many psychological changes resulting from physical changes, in that they are noted only after they are accomplished facts, the new social mind that resulted from annihilation of space and time was immediately cognizant of its attitudes. The people consciously tried to assimilate the revolution of all their mundane relationships, quietly and sanely. In the main, they did a good job of it, though according to the Lady's Book, there was a deal of excited running to and fro. And of that running about Godey's did it share in the persons of its writers. Our anticipations cannot keep pace with the realities that are continually overtaking them. But we have only to be true to ourselves, and the power exists not that can stop us on our onward course. A bright light is forever gleaming through the mist that veils the futurity of America. So wrote Eliza Leslie, Miss Leslie, as she was always signed herself, in an account of her tour to Niagara, published in Godey's for November 1845. So that's some pretty heavy stuff to add to your, I went to Niagara. Miss Leslie took both herself and the trip very seriously, but in 1845, it was a serious undertaking to travel all the way from Philadelphia to Niagara Falls. Oh my God, like that's a day trip nowadays. And two, was not, well, maybe not a day trip, but you guys know what I mean. And two, was not Miss Leslie one of the most up-and-coming writers of her day? In any event, her seriousness reflected the feeling of the people who, individually and collectively, were awake to the fact that railroad transportation was destined to rush the country into a development theretofore undreamed. Though the magnitude of that development none could foresee. It is so funny. I mean, people, their minds being blown by steam power. What would somebody from this era, like, how would they manage if they just showed up, in 2024? And I mean, like, I could see somebody just like, I think that would blow their minds so much they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. This is interesting. This is sort of a little off topic, but relevant. I was watching a true crime documentary, and they were interviewing a man who, witchcraft everywhere. Exactly. So this true crime story, they were interviewing a man. He was not involved in the crime, but he had been in prison for 30 years for something he claims he did not commit. But anyway, they were interviewing him about his cellmate. And long story short, he'd been in prison for 30 years, and they took him somewhere outside the prison. And he said that he got immediately like sick and was just like couldn't compose himself because he, again, had been in prison since like the 70s and had never been in a car going so fast and had not been in a car like in 30 years. And, I realize this is like a prison story, but the idea of, not having had contact with something that was more technologically advanced just over the period of your own life. That's mind blowing. And so looking at this, I'm just thinking how far we have come. I don't think that somebody from, say, the mid 1800s could even imagine. Like you're saying, absolutely witchcraft. Okay. Still, one and all kept their eyes on the bright light. Meantime, being descendants of the world's greatest adventurers, they discounted that many accidents, and fortified with bottles labeled "Luck to the Railroad," began. All right, wait a minute. Fortified with bottles labeled. Okay, let me read that again. Meantime, being descendants of the world's greatest adventurers, they discounted the many accidents and fortified with bottles labeled "Luck to the Railroad." Began that moving about for which America has remained famous, and which in these later days Mr. Ford and his fellows have so materially helped along. I feel like she's talking about something that if this were 1931, we might know what she was talking about. As Miss Leslie explained, much going from place to place in former years had been prohibitive because the expenses of traveling by stage were so great that few but the rich could afford such a luxury. Same with first class, my friend. Air travel you would wish just got cheaper and easier, and it has done no such thing. But in 1845, she was able to assure the readers of the Lady's Book that the trip from New York or Philadelphia to Niagara and return could be made by steamboat and steam cars in a week. With any sort of luck, and the whole expense to each person need not exceed $50, including everything. $50 seems like a lot back then. No wonder a trip to Niagara Falls became the most fashionable wedding journey in the entire history of the world. And it still is. I don't know, maybe post-pandemic it's not, but I feel like, didn't Pam and Jim from The Office, they got married at Niagara Falls or something? I feel like that's still like in our consciousness. Miss Leslie had a thrilling time on the jaunt she made for Godey's, and the magazine played her account up just as importantly as it knew how. She went from New York to Albany by boat, with only one accident, which stopped our paddle wheels. All the way up the Hudson River, and just One accident. That is almost unheard of. Oh my God. That's like saying, I drove to another state and there was only one accident. Unheard of. And the journey was delayed only an hour and a half off the Dunderberg. I guess the Dunderberg is the name of the ship or the boat. Dunderberg. That doesn't sound like a boat I would have much faith in. Nevertheless, ever so slight a mishap had made the female passengers a trifle nervous, because just before it occurred, they had passed the melancholy wreck of the Swallow, lying lonely and shattered, where she had been stranded on that fatal night, which will long be remembered by the friends of those who perished in her. Ooh. The Swallow, like so many of her kind in those early days, had burst her boiler with the usual heavy loss of life. Wow. Ugh. So I'm guessing Dunderberg is not the name of the boat because they have Swallow. She has Swallow in italics. So I'm thinking that if Dunderberg were the name of the boat, it too would be in italics, I think. So a train was boarded at Albany, and westward roared the locomotive at the furious speed of 21 miles an hour. Oh, so Mardum says Dunderberg Mountain is a 1,086-foot mountain on the west bank of the Hudson River at the southern end of the Hudson Highlands. Okay. All right. Okay. So off the Dunderberg, I guess, means you've crossed the mountain. So 21 miles an hour. Oh my God, that's breakneck speed. But at Utica, 93 miles away, everyone was ordered out, for here the cars were all changed. The change, relates Miss Leslie, was by no means for the better, and I asked the conductor if there was no ladies' car. Oh, there were ladies' cars. I forgot about that. He replied that all cars are equally polite. This was true. Therefore, none were exempt from the tobacco nuisances. The polite cars were by no means so comfortable as those in which we had commenced our journey. But we consoled ourselves with the hope, which was afterwards realized, that before we reached Buffalo, we could again have the pleasure of riding genteelly. It seems to be an ancient custom, always observed in the days of stagecoaches, to put on the best vehicles at the beginning and end of the route and the worst in the middle. You know, I feel like anytime I have to ride a plane and make a connection, the first plane is always better than the second one. There might be something to this. Of all the interesting things and places she saw, that which impressed Miss Leslie most, excepting Niagara itself, was the town of Syracuse. I was agreeably surprised to find this village, as the inhabitants with amazing modesty still continue to call it, in reality a very large and city-looking town, with lofty brick houses and an air of business doing on an extensive scale. So this is interesting. So Syracuse was, what year did they say this was in? 1845. So Syracuse was a grand place in 1845. The Great Erie Canal passes directly through the central square, where it receives the Oswego Canal that comes down from Lake Ontario. These canals and their fine bridges give a singular aspect to this square, the St. Mark's Place of Syracuse, for I could not help thinking of Venice. Oh, Venice. Particularly when we afterwards saw a wide street built so directly on the Grand Canal that all the houses on one side descend so immediately to the water that you may step out from the door into a boat. Huh. I wonder if it's still like that. I have not traveled to upstate New York, so I don't know. I know those of you, I think our friend Molly's not here today. I know she lives in upstate New York, but I'm curious, for those of you that have traveled up there, does Syracuse still look like Venice? And can you walk out of your front door and step right onto a boat into the Hudson? I'm sorry, not the Erie Canal, not the Hudson. From Syracuse, the traveler proceeded to Buffalo, a fine young city risen from the ashes of a small wooden village burnt by the British in 1814. Due to inevitable delays, the train arrived much later than scheduled, though no accident was to blame, but only the passengers themselves. They had failed to return promptly to the cars after the midday stops. For at noon, everybody, following custom, disembarked and proceeded to a hotel. The word tavern is fast becoming obsolete. for dinner. So the train was late because everybody disembarked to get dinner. It was not until the railroad companies grew hard-hearted enough to leave behind any enthusiast who insisted on inopportune sightseeing that the indefinite holding of trains for the dinner hour was done away with. So it sounds to me like back in the day, the train would actually wait for you. That does not happen anymore. They will leave you behind so fast. 11 years later, Mr. Godey took his first Western tour and also his first vacation. His armchair, and if you remember, that's his little letter from the editor, announced it thus: "Dear readers, we have been abroad." I like how he calls himself we. "We have been abroad. After 27 years confined to a desk, we decided to take a month's holiday." He was able, by 1856, to go by railroad and river steamer clear to St. Paul. And what impressed the practical publisher most was, first, the lack of drinking water in the cars, which he pointed out as a special inconvenience to women traveling with children. Was there ever a children who did not want a drink of water at the precise moment when water was unavailable? This is true. And secondly, the fact that there was no food for sale at the railroad stations. He considered the custom of the trains waiting for passengers to go to a hotel to dine both a waste of time and a source of extra fatigue. He is so right. It would be simple to have a tank of drinking water in each car, he said, and why not have ham sandwiches for sale at the stations? Why not indeed? I would take a ham sandwich at a train station. They are very good and very handy, for they can be eaten in the cars. I'm guessing, at this point, sandwiches were probably not like an everyday occurrence. So I could do with a ham sandwich on a train. 11 more years, and George Mortimer Pullman, who started life as a cabinet maker, added a kitchen to one of the 47 sleeping cars he had by then built. So yes, Pullman is the one that got us our ham sandwiches on the trains. Passengers were so enthusiastic over being able to procure food on trains that in 1868 he constructed his first real diner. Thus did Mr. Godey's idea of a ham sandwich evolve into the now familiar hotel service on wheels. In February 1863, the armchair asked another question. Why don't all of the railroad stations have the name of each distinctly and conspicuously put up for the information of passing travelers? Is every stopping place supposed to be so well known to strangers that exhibiting its name might be a superfluous accommodation? What complacency! Complacency indeed. Or is the accommodation of strangers a matter of no consequence? What a business idea! Reform it altogether, gentlemen. Put up the names. Put up the names. It was Mrs. Hale's nature, no less than Mr. Godey's, to demand progress. If a lack revealed itself, might not the age of invention be relied on to supply the want? In the book for June 1839, the lady editor wrote the following. We wish to publish portraits of celebrated literary ladies, and especially of the writers for this work. We find a difficulty, however, in procuring either paintings or miniatures. Can any of our friends help us in the dilemma? Even as Mrs. Hale sent out her appeal, the problem of obtaining likenesses by means less tedious and expensive than recourse to canvas and ivory was being solved, for the general public as well as for Godey's engravers. Louis Joseph Dagger. How do you say that man's name? Daggery? Daggery? The guy who invented daguerreotypes. Dagger? I don't know. That guy. The daguerreotypes guy. Announced his photographic discovery in January 1839. Early in 1840, the first daguerreotype was made in this country by Professor John William Draper of the University of the City of New York. How popular the process quickly became is best told by T.S. Arthur, author of the famous 10 Nights in a Barroom, in an article, The Daguerreotypist, Published in Godey's in 1849, as part of a series he contributed under the general title American Characteristics. The daguerreotypist began as follows. If our children and children's children are not in possession of portraits of their ancestors, it will be no fault of the daguerreotypists of the present day. For verily, they are limiting faces at a rate that promises soon to make every man's house a daguerrean gallery. Daguerreotype. Okay. So is the man's name Daguerre? I guess it's French, right? This is his French name. Maybe? I don't know. Let's see. In our great cities, a daguerreotypist is to be found in almost every square, and there is scarcely a county in any state that has not one or more of these industrious individuals busy at work, catching the shadow ere the substance fade. A few years ago, it was not every man who could afford a likeness of himself. Now it is hard to find a man who has not the shadowy faces of his family done up in purple morocco and velvet. Mr. Arthur went on to explain the procedure of a daguerreotypist's operating room. I'm guessing he means the photo lab, where he said some persons, in taking their places in the chair, get so nervous that they tremble like aspens, and others, in a vain attempt to keep their features composed, distort them so much that they are frightened at their own image when it is placed in their hands. This reminds me of when I was about 6 or 7. It was probably 7. My school picture. I was absolutely positive that I was smiling like a supermodel, and the picture came out like this. And I don't know why the photographer did not stop me, but my picture is like this. It's so ridiculous. Okay, so Louis-Jacques Daguerre. Okay, so it's Daguerre. French artist and photographer recognized for his invention of the eponymous daguerreotype process of photography. Yep. Most famous for... Oh, he was also an accomplished painter, scenic designer, and a developer of the diorama theater. Very cool. Very cool. Daguerre. Okay. If the subject's own images frightened them, it is pardonable that their children's children since have wondered why so many of these portraits of their ancestors depict individuals of such fierce and forbidding being. But with their faces being limned in an operating room, much is explained. I'm thinking when she's using, or they're using the term limned, L-I-M-N-E-D, or limb. Is that the lighting? Is that what they're talking about? Oh, yes, it is the lighting. Can't you take me a likeness without these dark places? Asks a lady who sees with surprise a dirty mark under her nose. I'm guessing the light is coming down like that. Wrote Mr. Arthur, while another would like her picture well enough if her face were not so smutty. Such disfigurements by the camera must have been discouraging to the sitters. They surely are to posterity in an age awakening to the desirability of eugenically perfect forebears. However, it is a relief to know that what appeared as a mustache on great-grandmother's lip or a cast in great-grandfather's eye represents not an actual physical defect, but only a lying shadow, the prank of an old-time camera. Grandmother's mustache. Also, as related by Mr. Arthur, it was necessary to dress in colors that do not reflect too much light if one wanted a good picture. Just like you never want to wear stripes or herringbone in front of a green screen. Or really on TV at all. For a lady, a good dress is of some dark or figured material. A gentleman should wear a dark vest and cravat. For children, a plain or dark striped or figured dress is preferred by most daguerreotypists. Light dresses are in all cases to be avoided. All of which reveals that it was not that our ancestors were especially addicted to somber hues. It might be inferred from their pictures, but only that they were not permitted to wear gay colors when they had their daguerreotypes taken. So, I've always heard this about like really early pictures, is like you can't make any kind of determination about these people because the photography process was so, challenging. Like, you had to sit for a while. You couldn't, it wasn't like click. It was like 3 minutes later, click. So, yeah, that's, I think, why the people always looks like so fraught. Is because it took forever. So this is a picture, the daguerreotypist from Godey's Lady's Book, May 1849. So we see this gentleman with his camera taking a picture of this other guy. And isn't he a jaunty daguerreotypist? All right. Another series of articles that reflected the life and interests of the times ran intermittently for years under the general heading Everyday Actualities. Unlike the American Characteristics series, these articles were written in a serious vein by various experts, each technically versed in his own field. Oh, his. Of course, it's his. Their purpose was to keep the book's subscribers in comprehensive touch with mechanical progress, and in consequence, the story of the beginnings of most of today's industries is to be found in the old files of Godey's Lady's Book. This is interesting. Steam, electricity, water power, and their various applications. The manufacture of paper, tools, drugs, silk, and woolens. The production of cotton from the time the seed was planted until the finished commodity was sold across the counter as calico and chintz. The two textiles most widely used during the first 3/4 of the 19th century. All were described fully and accurately. I mean, our magazines don't do this for us now. Those that are still in business, right? Most people would probably be bored by these things. We wouldn't. The manufacture of gas and gas fixtures, appearing in Godey's for March 1853, discloses the fact that by that date, the main streets of the larger eastern cities were lighted rather generally by gas. It was dim, sickly flicker at best, but far superior to the watchman's lantern, the whale oil flare, whale oil flare. My car broke down on the side of the highway. Let me get out my whale oil flares to make sure no one hits me. Oh my goodness. Only Popular Mechanics does that. Now, indeed, and I happen to like Popular Mechanics. I love those magazines that show like the detail, even if I don't understand it. It's so interesting to read about. Whale oil flares. All right. So these gas lights are better than the watchman's lantern, the whale oil flare, or the individually carried pierced candle lantern, now known as the Paul Revere, though in use long before that patriot's famous ride, as well as for 100 years afterward. Paul Revere, he's come up twice today. Better than no flare. Now, do we mean flare like on our suspenders, a la Office Space? Baltimore has the honor of being the first city on this continent to illuminate its thoroughfares with gas, thanks to the efforts of artist Rembrandt Peale. Municipal light was turned on in Baltimore 1 hour after sunset on the evening of February 17th, 1817. I had no idea. The lamplighters hurrying with their little ladders from lamppost to lamppost and touching off each jet by hand. But it was not until after 1840 that gas was used to any extent in the lighting of private homes. Now here's a funny little aside about Baltimore and lighting. So this is pretty cool. That Baltimore was the first city in the U.S., or I guess not, well, this is continent, so I'm guessing North America? Sorry, Canada, if that's wrong. But the first to turn on municipal lighting as gas light. Now, a few years ago, I can't remember if this was mid-pandemic, maybe right before the pandemic, but they redid a whole bunch of streetlights kind of all over the place. I'm trying to think like if they, yeah, I mean, I think they went into the city, definitely near me, you know, around the Baltimore County, because I live outside the city. I'm in the county. But, you know, you'd be on these thoroughfares, and this company that, I can't remember what these lights were called, but there's some type of like an LED, like some super powered LED light. You know, they're supposed to be, I don't know, better for whatever. They last long, whatever. Well, it's funny how some of them would cast this purple, kind of purple glow. And literally everybody thought that it was because of the Ravens. Ravens, the football team, is so big in Baltimore. Like, it's, you know, Baltimore pride. Things can be bad. Things can be divisive. Things can be horrible in Baltimore. But you bring up the Ravens, everybody is together on that. unless you're a Steelers fan, in which case you're going to be tormented because Ravens-Steelers, huge rivalry. Anyway, so everybody's thinking that this purple glow is like, oh, how cool. They're doing this like purple Ravens thing with the streetlights. No. It turned out they were defective. There was something about this lighting thing was defective. So it was making this purple glow. Honestly, I was kind of like, and they even came up with this like phone number that you needed to call if you were driving around and you witnessed one of them, and just, you know, let them know where it is. But I was kind of like, I sort of liked it. I thought it was cool, you know, especially during football season. You're like, go Ravens. Anyway, seems like things are a little better in Baltimore with the gas lights than with the, I don't know, whatever these LED things are. Okay. Homemade candles remained the standby of the country at large. Molded or dipped, and lamps, the glass lamps now so prized that were produced most typically at Sandwich on Cape Cod. That's interesting. I don't know anything about glass. I mean, I'm assuming she means like kerosene lamps. I don't know. Maybe somebody accidentally ordered black lights. It's entirely possible. That's almost what they look like. But I mean, it's up so high, like it, you know, it wasn't acting like a black light, but it had that sort of glow to it. I think that the issue is like whatever the defect was, it I'm guessing impacted the lifespan of the lights. And so that's why they wanted to replace them. But I never heard anybody complain, because we were like, yeah, Baltimore bleeds purple when we're not bleeding orange. And honestly, the Orioles have not been so good in many years. So. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about sports any more than I want to talk about politics. So moving right along. Let's see. The illuminant burned in the lamps was whale oil, smudgy, evil-smelling stuff. Coal oil or kerosene did not come into general use until after the Civil War. Interesting. I did not know that. It had been discovered in 1850 by a Dr. Keir of Philadelphia, but at first people were afraid of it, as they should have been. Various compounds, such as camphene, a mixture of turpentine and alcohol, had been put on the market in attempts to conserve whale oil. It was feared that whales would be exterminated. Such was the extent of the whaling industry. Well, no poop. They did almost get extinct. And in some places, I think, aren't there some species of whale throughout the world that have been made extinct by whaling? Not just the U.S., but I think also like Japan, they were big whalers. And to afford better light, but all had proved highly explosive. So dangerous, in fact, that even scientists shied away from suggesting a new light fuel. So coal oil went begging for more than 10 years. Wow. But at last, Mrs. Hale was able conscientiously to assure her readers that repeated tests had proved the safety of the new illuminant, a product of the land which is far superior to the like product of the sea. So, natural gas versus the poor whales. In fact, the lady editor took very good care of her lady readers. Though constantly on the lookout for the new, she never recommended anything she did not believe in herself. she would be a very good influencer today. And she was always at pains to see that her still uncharacteristic information, she was always at pains to see that her still unsophisticated public was not too badly imposed upon. A bit of characteristic information which she furnished in November 1852, this time not to subscribers interested in washing machines and egg beaters, but to a rapidly growing clientele wishful to spend sudden wealth on such evidences of culture as old masters, is as apropos today as then. The country was just becoming conscious of the advantages of public art galleries and museums, to say nothing of the desirability of fine old paintings hung in one's own drawing room. Fine arts was a phrase on many tongues. Sojourners in Europe were bringing home what they had bought for treasures, all with a deal of splurge. But when two residents of New York returned with identical canvases, each reputed to be the original, there was even more talk, and a rude awakening as well. Oh, we thought this was just going to be about trains, but art heists, perhaps? Speaking of the modern supply of old masters, remarked the lady's book, the London Art Union holds the following. The late Mr. Zachary possessed some pictures by the great celebrities. In a back room was placed a stove, having no connection with the chimney, for the express intention that the smoke could ascend into the room. This stove was made from Mr. Zachary's design by Mr. Sanderson, ironmonger, No. 7 Maiden Lane, Covent Garden, and the accompanying sketch, Godey's offered the sketch, will give an idea of its construction. On the ceiling, iron rods were placed to which his copies were hung, resting obliquely on rails fixed down lower, as Mr. Zachary found that the copies were best cooked into antiquity by remaining over the stove at an angle of 45 degrees. Two poor artists were constantly employed by him in the house to make careful copies of his fine pictures. 3 months was about the time necessary to harden and discolor the paint on these canvases, which became similar enough for deception to old pictures. Oh, art forgery! Oh my goodness! It is the habit of 1 or 2 picture dealers in this country, continued the lady's book, to make pilgrimages to Europe. After a few months' absence, they will return with a large collection. Various names, well known to fame, are given as the artists, and many of the pictures are transferred to private homes. Those not sold at private sale after a certain time are put up at auction and bring good prices. Many pictures are merely copies purchased in Europe for a mere song. This old master mania, which has been so prevalent, will doubtless disappear. No, Sarah Hale, it didn't disappear. Now that it has become apparent that modern ingenuity has supplied that which ancient industry had failed to do, vis-a-vis a constant stock of old masters for posterity. Articles of this type were signed by an office pseudonym. Hickory Broom. Hickory Broom. That's an interesting pseudonym. The original being a popular household indispensable, justly famous for sweeping clean. When need arose, Mrs. Hale drafted Hickory from her editorial closet, and some skeleton was made to dance to the rattle of its own bones. Hickory Broom antedated the muckraking journalism of the early 20th century by more than 50 years. He was created by Sarah Hale to protect her readers from swindlers, for hers was the era not only of inventiveness, but of gullibility as well. That is interesting. I feel like Hickory Broom would be a wonderful name for my band. It was this desire to serve her public rather than any wish to function as the purveyor of news, this feeling of editorial responsibility that caused the lady editor to keep her readers informed of happenings pertaining to the settling of the West. Here she went so far as to announce the latest trail maps as fast as they were published and advise as to which were considered more dependable. Godey's took the extension of our Empire of the West very seriously. Yeah, well, manifest destiny. It was on everybody's mind, right? But over the rush to California, the lady's book was not wholly enthusiastic. It called the mad hysteria the gold fever, observing that as yet the means for obtaining correct statistical information is but partially reliable. Just the same, there was an editorial scurrying around for contributions interpreting the frenzy. The American flag was planted in California in July 1846, wrote H.T. Tuckerman in Godey's for March 1849. Emigration from the United States soon enlivened her population, whose prior resource had been chiefly the sale of hides obtained from the hordes of wild cattle. If the perspective of time were not a necessary condition of romance, the present age would be deemed wonderful. At some distant period, the novelist and historian will find prolific themes in the consequences which will follow a circumstance which happened a year ago on the American Fork, a California river almost 50 miles from New Helvetia. New Helvetia. A workman engaged in cutting a mill sluice saw many particles glitter in the sunshine at the bottom of his excavation. Gold, the treasure of kings. This precious metal, Tucker continued, is intermingled with the soil in various proportions over an extent of 600 miles. The fine dust is found chiefly in the beds of streams and along their borders, and the coarser deposits in the granite of the adjacent hills. That summer, the summer of '49, saw the famous Stampede West, and small wonder, 600 miles of gold. But even at the height of the gold rush, when Godey's was advising that the most accurate trail maps were those prepared and published by one S.A. Mitchell, especially that of Texas, comprising as it does the whole of Oregon and nearly all of California, the magazine asserted that not this most precious of all metals, not even a vein of the gold ore through it were 6 times 600 miles long, was the real treasure of the country. These are veins of iron and coal, of rich loam, intersecting this continent of vastly more importance to the welfare of the people, since they are destined to give reliable employment to thousands, to bring into existence new capital and new labor, and thus increase the only genuine basis of wealth, national industry. I mean, Sarah Hale did not have the right to vote. But she was really, really this is a modern concept of creating industry for our communities versus, wasting our time on cryptocurrency, right? Wow. Okay. The lady's book, one must confess, was much more than a parlor magazine. It did not preach, yet it put far-sighted ideas into the people's heads. Its editor was a far-sighted woman who, in the simplicity of her thinking, realized that in the long run, the characteristics of individuals must prove to be the characteristics of the nation. And great was Sarah Hale's faith in the individual. All the greater because she understood how frailty is bred in men and women by mere limitation. She knew, for instance, that physical restriction, confinement to one house, one town, one countryside, is largely responsible for lacks of sympathy beyond the selfishly domestic problem. She conceived it a part of her job to widen the individual horizon. Thus, her earliest writings is to be found a little essay. Thus, among her earliest writings is to be found a little essay called The Romance of Travel, in which, noting with satisfaction the numbers of men and women and even children abroad to see the wonders of the Grand Canal, the Erie Canal had been open to traffic in 1825. She not only advocated travel as a means of culture, but saw it as an important political factor in a country of diverse interests. She said, "It seems as if circumstances have almost inevitably designed us as a nation of travelers. We should be acquainted with our own country and people. It is only by such means that errors will be corrected, prejudices removed, and that good feeling and liberality of sentiment cultivated, which are indispensable to the perpetuity of the Union." Sarah Hale was a wise woman. And the time came before the lady's book editor laid her pen aside when she could write the story of the linking of the East and West by steam. Facility of transportation was indeed to open up the veins of iron and coal and rich loam and be indispensable, at least to restoration of the perpetuity of the Union. So, that's kind of Reconstruction type stuff. I'm assuming that she's talking about post-Civil War. The first transcontinental railroad was completed in 1869. Mrs. Hale wrote in an editorial published in August, "We have now another great achievement to record. On Monday, the 10th of May, the last rail was laid of the iron band between our Atlantic and Pacific shores. At 2:45 p.m. on that day, the following dispatch was received at New York. Promontory Summit, Utah, May 10th, 1869. The last rail is laid. The last spike is driven. The Pacific Railroad is completed. The point of junction is 1,086 miles west of the Missouri River and 690 miles east of Sacramento City." If it's 690 miles... Oh, I guess it's the point of junction. Okay, never mind. "The iron track now stretches in an unbroken line from the tidewaters of the Atlantic at Philadelphia to the waters of the Pacific, 3,089 miles. As the London Times, referring to the Suez Canal, observed, M. de Lesseps, I'm assuming this is he's an engineer maybe, M. de Lesseps, will deserve infinite credit for his perseverance and success." Oh, okay, so this is the guy, the engineer for the Suez Canal. "But the American engineers, who bridged with iron rails a desert as broad as the Atlantic at the rate of 6 miles a day, may certainly advance their own claims to the surprise and admiration of mankind." So that's interesting. Okay, so the railroad across the U.S. progressed at a rate of 6 miles a day, according to this. Am I reading that right? I think I am. That's actually pretty amazing. 1869, 6 miles a day. That's a pretty big deal. "The Pacific Railway is at once an indication of our progress in subduing nature and a help to further victories. 50 years ago, before steam was utilized, not thrice the resources of the nation could have achieved it, and perhaps 50 years hence we shall look back upon it as only one of many great exploits that mark the onward tide of our civilization, victories of peaceful labor above all the red and dazzling glories of successful war." Successful war, I don't like that, but... And that is that chapter. Very interesting. Okay, so the next chapter is kind of another long one. Ooh, and then we get to Thanksgiving. So how about we split this one in half, and then we'll finish up the rest next Monday. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot. Remind me to say this again at the end. I will not be streaming on Thursday. So this week, no Thursday. Tomorrow, of course, Jill and I have our normal quilt nerding, 8 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube. And then this Wednesday is a Needlework Nights Wednesday. We're just doing it once a month now. So those two things are happening this week. I am traveling on Thursday, so no stream on Thursday. I will, however, be back for a stream on Monday. So week from Monday, you'll see me again, assuming you don't come to the quilt nerding streams. So, chapter 11, The Union Forever. I wonder if this is going to be about the Civil War. It's possible. So let's see. Would be a good stopping point on this chapter. Some interesting things happen in this chapter, apparently. Okay, I think I have a spot here. Okay, chapter 11, The Union Forever. George Washington was chosen first president in 1788. In 1788, Sarah Hale was born. His name was among the first she learned to speak. He was the leader, the hope, and the idol of her childhood world. She heard his opinions quoted as infallible by her soldier father. Her patriotic mother taught her the great general's famous 48 rules of conduct to serve as her own personal guide. I did not know that George Washington had 48 rules of conduct. I'm trying to think. Maybe I do know what this is. Let's see. Let's see if she gets into it. So, 48 rules of conduct to serve as her own personal guide, rules she was to reprint in the magazine she edited later, not once, but many times. First in war, first in peace, first in the heart of an impressionable child, Washington remained the hero of Sarah Hale's life. To her, he was more than a man. He was a symbol that stood for union. Like all women born out of the Revolution, her tenet of civic faith was the strength of union. I like that. With her own eyes, she had watched the Union's slow upbuilding. Personally, she had shared in the doubts and fears, the adjustments and sacrifices that are the price paid by the least of every new government's citizens. And as Sarah Hale knew the cost of union, so she estimated its value. The Union, her beloved Union, must be kept inviolable. Yet, she feared for its dissolution with a fear that haunted her for more than 30 years. Her initial voicing of this fear was her first novel, Northwood, subtitled Or Life North and South. Published in 1827, it was the earliest notable attempt to establish a better social and economic understanding between the states. And while it favored the abolishment of slavery, this was secondary to its real theme, preservation of the Union. Northwood was a great success in its day, running quickly through 4 American editions, besides being reprinted in England and, incidentally, opening the way for its author's editorial career. She's mentioned Northwood a number of times. I feel like it's a novelette. I feel like she's mentioned like before that it's not a super like chunky novel. I would be interested in reading it just to see what it's about. But yeah, I it's not clear to me like exactly what it is because I feel like we've gotten a lot of information about it, but not really very many quotes or anything. So the 5th edition, brought out years later in September 1852, was aimed at counteracting the inflammatory influence of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which had run serially in the National Era before it appeared in book form in March of the same year. So I guess the National Era must be another type of magazine. In the preface of this edition, Mrs. Hale states her own attitude on the consuming question of her times. She says, in part, Northwood was written when what is now known as abolitionism first began to disturb seriously the harmony between the North and the South. In the retirement of my mountain home, no motives save the search for truth prompted the sentiments expressed in this work, nor had a wider sphere of observation, or the long time for examination and reflection, changed materially the views I then adopted. These views, based on the conditions of the compact the framers of the Constitution recognized as lawful, and the people of the United States solemnly promised to observe, have been confirmed by a careful study of the Word of God as well as of human history. That it is easier to burn a temple than to build one, and that 2 wrongs never make one right, are points conceded by all. Yet all seem not to have considered what is quite as sure, that fraud and falsehood never promote the cause of goodness, nor can physical force make or keep men free. The great error of those who would sever the Union rather than see an enslaved person, I'm using today's connotations, than see an enslaved person within its borders, is that they forget their master is their brother as well as the servant. Hoping that Northwood might in some degree aid in diffusing the true spirit, I have consented to its republication at this time. Here she calls to mind a fact that since has been too generally forgotten. The South seceded, but originally it was not alone in entertaining thought of a possible break in the National Federation. There were, among abolition reformers, men and women of the North who would have severed the Union rather than see an enslaved person within its borders. It was to these Mrs. Hale addressed her propaganda quite as much as to the increasingly oversensitive South. The following year, 1853, she published Liberia. In this novel, she set forth her idea of the solution of the great problem, which was first education of enslaved people for the responsibilities of emancipation, and then purchased freedom, the price to be paid either by the United States government or earned by the enslaved people themselves. I'm not liking these abolitionist procedures. How about set people free? Give them what you promised you would give them and help them succeed. Finally, these freed exponents of a Christian civilization were to be sent to join the African colony of Liberia. That historic experiment, as benevolent as it proved impractical, which had been started by the American Colonization Society as early as 1820, up to the Civil War itself, many people hoped Liberia might solve the problem. The problem of the African who, to quote Mrs. Hale, among us has no home, no position, and no future, since two races who do not intermarry can never live together as equals. Oh, okay. Even as an abolitionist, she's got some gross thoughts on this. Ugh. Ugh. Okay. Maybe I don't want to read Mirthwood, and I especially don't want to read Liberia. Good Lord. While privately, Mrs. Hale might republish the polemical Northwood and follow it up with a second novel supporting the Liberian movement, no such frankness was possible in the Lady's Book. For a policy permitting neither religious nor political discussion, formulated at the time of the consolidation of the Ladies' Magazine and the Lady's Book, was stubbornly adhered to by Mr. Godey. You know, I suspect if she had been able to drag any politics in, and I don't think she wanted to, but if she did, I kind of think maybe it would not have been as successful of a magazine. You know, I mean, think about magazines today that are really popular, you know, those that are still in print. I can't think of, I mean, with the exception of like Time magazine, I mean, I can't think of a whole lot that has a political bend to it. You know, I mean, you know, your general, you know, reading magazines. I mean, I know they do cover some political stuff, but okay. I allow no man's religion to be attacked or sneered at, or the subject of politics to be mentioned in my magazine, he boasted at the public dinner given him in honor of the completion of the periodical's 50th volume. The first is obnoxious to myself, and to the latter the ladies object. And it is my business and pleasure to please them, for to them, God bless the fairest portion of his creation, am I indebted for my success. He did love the ladies. So when in 1861 the quarrel between the states flared into armed conflict, the upheaval to all practical interests and purposes was ignored by the Lady's Book, presumably in conformity with the theory that the fairest portion of creation objected to politics. It was a signally obtuse mistake, whether of publisher or editor or both. Then Mrs. Hale's political leanings were with the Northern Democrats and I cannot read today. That of Mrs. Hale's political leanings were with the Northern Democrats and definitely against the war as well is well known. But that she should have failed to see the great opportunity war offered the book for altruistic service seems impossible. For it was just at this time that the magazine was enjoying the peak of its success and influence. Under her editorship, the circulation had reached 150,000, which, being interpreted, meant that in days when newsstand sales of monthlies were nil, the Lady's Book had found a welcome into 150,000 homes. This figure seems small now, with the circulation of more than one women's magazine overtopping 1 million. But in 1861, 150,000 was more outstanding than is today the figure resulting from an added cipher. Then Godey's was the only women's periodical in even the 100,000 class. It is unique, and it is very uniqueness enhanced its power. And if the modern editor is justified in his accustomed calculation that each copy of his publication is read by at least 5 persons, then in an age when magazines and newspapers were passed from family to family to be returned punctiliously, Ruth Finley loves these big words, to be returned punctiliously to the original subscriber for preservation. Everybody had magazines bound yearly until 1890. The Lady's Book's actual readers must have multiplied its strictly sales circulation by a numeral much larger than 5. There's that crazy math. Mr. Godey himself estimated that the magazine had 1 million readers in 1860, but he did not retain the full million long. A good third were Southern, to be lost as soon as communication by mail was stopped between the Union and Confederate states. Punctiliously. There's your new word. With difficulty, one avoids the thought that it was with these Southern subscribers in mind that the Lady's Book, in the midst of the life struggle of the nation, when men and institutions, fully as heartbroken over the rupture as Mr. Godey, and as sincerely opposed to war as Mrs. Hale, were forced to take sides, adhered to its original policy of no politics. Yet no direct evidence supports the suspicion, though in the armchair for December 1865, it is to be found this characteristic announcement of the publisher, along with the usual flattering notices reprinted from culls of the newspapers. Let me take a sip, and then I will read what he said. 150,000 copies. Our edition for next year, judging from present appearances, will be the number we mention. Clubs pour in upon us to an extent that we never witnessed before, especially from the South, that have been deprived of their favorite magazines so long. So this is the hoop skirt of the Civil War from Godey's Lady's Book, August 1863. Just take a look at that before we move on. The Scarlet O'Haras were wearing their hoop skirts and were very sad because they could not get their Godey's Lady's Book. Whether or not such a statement is significant in its inference, the fact is that Godey's did not help win the war. Despite its lost Southern circulation, it remained throughout the conflict the biggest magazine in the country. It, and it alone, could have instantly rallied the women of the North and assured quick hospital relief. With the woman at its head, who was expert above all others in the technique of feminine organization, it could have saved time, money, confusion, suffering, and life. But it did nothing of the kind. When Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, one of the book's own protégés, sent out the first call for nurses, Godey's published not a word. When Clara Barton, emulating Florence Nightingale, whom the book had all but deified, fought for the sanctity of the wounded, the issue was ignored. When finally women everywhere were scraping lint and rolling bandages haphazard fashion, the book remained silent. Silent over the charity fairs held for the benefit of the Sanitary Commission once it was organized. Though in the reflected glory of the highly successful fair at Philadelphia, Godey's could not fail to expand. Silent when it might have brought order out of the chaos by directing the eager but inexperienced energies of its readers, by telling them what to give and how to serve. That's really interesting. I mean, I understand, no politics, but I mean, to not talk about what women were doing and could be doing? There is no question but that Godey's failed lamentably. Nor can there be any question but that its editor realized both the need and the opportunity. None can escape the shadow, she admitted in her New Year editorial for 1862. She had fought too many humanitarian fights and won. Too many times had she taken up arms in behalf of mental and physical suffering, not to recognize the acme of torment when it came. Indeed, she had anticipated it, imploring women to use their influence against secession, warning them of the supreme tragedy of civil war. True, her Lady's Book campaign for the Union had been somewhat veiled. One wonders now if Mr. Godey was completely hoodwinked by the cloak of Americanization. His editor threw around her political propaganda series after series of articles and editorials, fiction even, on the Revolution, on the North, on the South, on the New West, that she published for 20 years, all battling, however indirectly, against secession for the oneness of the states. Even the postal laws, kept close tab on by publisher Godey, were made to serve as a text. A new enactment in 1845 called forth the following editorial by Mrs. Hale, printed in August. She said in part, "Domestic associations are not of trifling importance. It is this union of hearts and memories which must preserve and perpetuate our political union. When feelings of kindly interest are cherished by all, there will be no danger of discord between the states. The narrow spirit that sees a rival or enemy in every different section will yield to..." I skipped a page. "Will yield to the ties of relationship or good feeling, binding individuals and families to cherish and extend the familiarity of intercourse, which may now be maintained in every part of our common country. The new post office law has happily removed the chief barrier from mental intercourse. We have no longer an excuse for being strangers." This is interesting. I mean, I don't know. I swear I didn't read ahead. I did not read this chapter. It's just interesting. I mean, she's basically talking about division and, yeah. An isolated editorial or two of this type would mean nothing. Such could have been rhetorical merely or accidental. But pleas for the Union were not isolated. There were many of them through the years, all crying for understanding, compromise, patience, urging the love of country be unselfishly placed above sectional loyalty. Exhortations like these sought to arouse the country's womanhood. Our exemption from these evils, those of the French Revolution is what she's talking about, was due, under God, to woman's influence, woman, the handmaid, of fortitude, perseverance, patriotism, and piety. And when the independence of the nation was successfully asserted, the same good influence saved 13 sovereignties from falling into quarrels and civil war. Americans! Those ties are your salvation still. The above, quoted from the lead article for March 1845, was followed during the next 15 years, just as it had been preceded during the former 5, by such series as The Heroic Women of America, unsigned and probably written by Mrs. Hale, and The Heroic Women of the Revolution by Mrs. E.F. Ellett, a well-known Southern writer, who, if she told the story of a main heroine one month, related that of a woman of Virginia the next. A long serial novel by W. Gilmore Simms called Catherine Walton, A Tale of the Revolution, kept before the ladies' books public in the early 50s the price paid for the Union, while a favorite theme for fiction was a Southern hero winning a Northern bride, or vice versa. Indeed, this last was an old formula of Mrs. Hale's own. In one of her earliest collections of short stories, a little volume of a dozen tales published in 1829 under the general title of Sketches of American Character, appeared The Springs, written after this pattern and ending in the following note. The domestic happiness of this amiable couple is often mentioned by Mr. Chapman, and he declares that, in his opinion, the best method of promoting harmony between the different sections of our Union would be to promote intermarriage among its inhabitants. There is, he remarks, more affinity between the youths and maidens of the North and South than between cotton growers and cotton manufacturers. Okay. Here was the first hint of Sarah Hale's later contention that not slavery, but economics was the real issue between the states. The early trend of New England toward industrialism, fostered by the enormous amount of natural water power to be had for the harnessing of tumbling mountain streams, caused, she claimed, the original suggestion of a breach. Many years before abolition became more than a theme for unpopular minority agitation, Mrs. Hale was so apprehensive over the increasing economic rivalry, as well as the political jealousy, between the two sections that an amazingly large portion of her writings were devoted to an effort were devoted to an effort to enlist agrarianism and industrialism in common progress. So I'm gonna stop there. I think that's probably a good spot. Let me mark this. So come back to it on Monday. All right. So I thank you guys for suffering through my my soapbox of I don't know what earlier. You know, I mean, it's a struggle for somebody who just doesn't really like politics and doesn't like, you know, all that comes out of it. It's really hard to talk about, you know, centennial, bicentennial, quarter millennial, you know, without getting into politics. Like, how do you separate those? So it's gotta find the way to slice, you know, get rid of the politics and just talk about, you know, the good things, the coming together, the linking arms, right, of our communities. So I'm going to leave it there. It is 4 p.m. Eastern, my time. So I somehow managed that perfectly. I never do that. And again, not going to be here on Thursday of this week, but I will be back on Monday. And as always, if you're free over the next 2 evenings, would love you to join me and Jill on quilt nerding. We are starting a new book tomorrow. And let me show it off while I have you. It is To Honor and Comfort Native Quilting Traditions. It's as funny or not funny. I chose this because I wanted to read this book. And I'm like, we are starting it the week of, you know, Indigenous People Day, which I guess is today, right? Today is, I think. Anyway. So we'll be starting that. It's going to be a really good book. And you've read the one page, Kate? Let's see, Robin. I have a vague memory of a group. Vague memory of a group I belong to talking about doing a quilt for 2026. I will do some checking. Great. Yeah. Let me know. Absolutely. Let me know. That's so cool. Oh, Robin, can't wait to get into the book. Yes. You know, I flipped through and looked at the pictures. I have not read, so I'm really excited to actually read this. So, yes, today is a federal holiday. So, yeah, and so we're going to start on that. Wednesday is needlework nights, and we are doing measuring tapes. So we've kind of got a broad group of things to look at because we didn't get like super granular about what type of measuring tape. So I will be surprising Jill with what I have. All right, guys, have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. I hope you have a great week. If I don't see you the next 2 evenings, I'll see you next Monday. Have a super week. Fingers crossed. No bad weather for anybody, anywhere in the world. We're done with it. We're tired of it. And we just want to have some blue skies and touch some grass, right? Yeah. So thank you guys. As always, you're the wind beneath my wings. You're the reason I can do this. And I love you very much. So, mwah, mwah. Have a great afternoon.